Hello. Um, Welcome to the LSU Press's latest remote author series. If there's anybody out there, please do message to show me that you're there. I will stall for 30 seconds or so to let people take their seats. But I believe that we are now live. I'm just waiting to see if anybody puts a message to show that that's the case. Watching with you, says Nicola Kathleen. I think that means that there is somebody sitting there, which is wonderful. And LB Kovac has joined as well. Okay, so I'm assuming that there are some people out there. I'll just start with some preliminaries. Firstly, to thank LB Kovac for organising this latest in the LSU Press series of remote author talks. I'm Gavin Cologne-Brookes, and I'm going to talk about American Lonesome, the work of Bruce Springsteen. I'm in my studio in Wiltshire. It's 2 o'clock Louisiana time, 8 p.m. UK time. I know that there are people who will be watching in from, I believe there's someone watching in from Mexico. I know there's somebody watching in from Ukraine. I think there'll be some people obviously from the States, from elsewhere in the UK, elsewhere in Europe. All welcome. Feel free to make any comments you want in the comment board, just hello or whatever you like. As I give my talk, if you have questions that you would like to ask, either about the talk or about the book itself, put those down, and when I've finished talking, I'll go through and try and answer any or all of the questions that you put to me. I will talk for 26 minutes, maximum 27, but it will be something like 25 minutes about the book American Lonesome. And in talking about it, I will read very short excerpts to give you a sense of the shape of the book. And if there's a theme to this, the book is American Lonesome, and obviously in this period of lockdown that we've all experienced around the world, it seems particularly pertinent to be talking about lonesomeness and companionship, because sociability and solitude are the two poles around which our lives are shaped. And I'm interested in what art and music and painting and literature, and particularly the work of Bruce Springsteen, brings to that experience. I'll say something about myself, and then I'll go into the shape of the book. I left school with very few qualifications. Like many people, 18, 19, 20, I was adrift. I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I felt a degree of anxiety about making the most of my life. And I worked a couple of summers in American summer camps in 1979 and 1980. And it was while I was there that a camp counselor named David Gelman, known as Dogie, introduced me to the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, and therefore to the music of Springsteen. And I went home and I decided, having not got into university, I would study at night school, and I would try to get into university and start some sort of career. And in doing that, in driving the car, I listened to Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town, and especially the song Badlands. And the song Badlands had an absolutely huge effect on my psyche as a teenager. In particular, the lines talk about a dream, try to make it real, you wake in the night with a fear so real, spend your life waiting for a moment that just don't come, or don't waste your time waiting. At that age, often we feel that if we haven't achieved anything by 22, then really we're middle-aged. So that sense of urgency was there in those lines, and they were an absolute catalyst, galvanizing me to try and make something of my youthful ambition. So I was very lucky that I got to listen to Springsteen, hear about Springsteen at that stage of my life. And I was even luckier because the following year, I got a ticket to Wembley Arena to see Springsteen live. And it was so important to me that I still have that ticket. It's in a frame with some other things, but I have a photocopy here of the ticket that in a sense changed my life. And you'll see that it's row A, row 3, block A, 1981, April 1981. In fact, Springsteen didn't turn up for the show, but nor did I, nor did anybody else, because it was cancelled. And it was cancelled because, for quite an important reason, Springsteen has a tremendous work ethic, and he worked so hard that he suffered from exhaustion, and the show was postponed. So then it did take place in June 1981, and by this time I'd waited 3 months for this great show, and I was a little enthusiastic in the third row, and I kept calling out for a song, and he was playing all the River songs, and I wanted a song from Born to Run. So I kept calling, and in the end, he got a little bit fed up with this overexcitable teenager in the third row, and he came up and he leaned over the first 2 rows, and he pointed at me and he said, "We'll get that one for you later." Well, this was like, it was like the painting, the Michelangelo painting in the Sistine Chapel, where Adam is, life is given to him through this kind of this moment of connection. And I left that concert, I remember having seen Clarence Clemens there, 9 foot tall, just in front of us, and these extraordinary people and this excitement on stage. I left that and got back in my car and drove faster and played the music louder and studied Renaissance history. Now that doesn't sound very rock and roll, but to me that was my rock and roll, was to study history at night school, listening to this music, and that got me into university. And then I did an MA in upstate New York. I got a scholarship to do an MA in upstate New York, and then I did a PhD, and I began my career as an academic, as an American Studies professor and a literature professor, and I started writing my books, and this is my 4th book for Louisiana LSU Press. So that kind of zing, that moment was hugely important. The book that the other interest that I have that comes out in American Lonesome, and as you can see around the studio, the various paintings of people, 1 or 2 of whom you might recognise. The book before that was called Rereading William Styron, and this came from me doing a painting, a portrait of the author, William Styron, and then writing the book as a result of that. And then the cover of the book becomes the painting that I had been doing when I conceived of the book. And I find that very satisfying, that mixture of genres, because I think that portrait painting, oil painting, but portraits in particular, and writing about somebody's work are, for me, very much the same kind of process of observation. So while that book was in the pipeline, I saw Springsteen again in Coventry in 2013, and I thought, well, I write about American authors. Why don't I write a book about Springsteen? He is an American writer. He's also a performer and a musician and a rock star, but he's a writer fundamentally too. And so I wrote American Lonesome, and that brought me back to the beginnings. It brought me back to where I had begun this journey. And so part of the book is a kind of memoir of that time, and of being so influenced by a handful of lines in a single song. And when I had written the book, I then did a painting, a portrait of Springsteen, which I have to get it right. Here, up there. There it is. That's him next to Clarence, who's there. And I sent it to LSU Press and said, can we use this in the cover somehow, with red, white, and blue, but kind of muted colours. And the designer, the very talented designer Michelle Neustrom, came up therefore with this cover for the book, with the portrait on it. So again, the kind of familial sealed that particular narrative and process. So the book itself, American Lonesome, how is it shaped? I'll just explain the way that I approached it. And I wanted to try and write a book that was very different from anything anyone else had written, about Springsteen. So it merges cultural criticism and memoir and travel writing and so on. And in the preface, I go to Asbury Park, where I had never been. I'd flown over it, I knew about it. In my mind, it was an extraordinary place because it was filled with Springsteen's lyrics. So I wanted to go and see, Kingston and the Upstage and the Stone Pony and the Boardwalk and all the things that Springsteen, where he performed and what he sings about. And I also went to see the Born to Run house. I'm fascinated by where art is created. Being a literature professor, I immediately, when I saw the house, thought of Flaubert, the French novelist, for this reason. In Madame Bovary, Flaubert talks of the loftiness of his heroine Emma's dreams and the littleness of her house. My goodness, she would have hated living in the Born to Run house. It is the smallest house I have ever seen. You can see at the back there, possibly next to another painting of Springsteen, the house, the Born to Run house. It's tiny, and I recorded what I was thinking about, looking at that, thinking this is where the album Born to Run was written. I picture him gripped with an obsession to break through to a promised land, to escape a town full of losers, to win, working his band to the bone in that squat beach house, so at odds with the grandiosity of the musical landscape with its giant Exxon signs, its highways and avenues and the big man joining the band. The brain is wider than the sky, writes Emily Dickinson. As I stand before this house, the roof of which looks touchable without stretching up, it reminds me that the mind is a universe. We can make of the world something dramatic, however mundane our outward existence. Because my interests are also in painting, on my way home from there, I went to New York, to the Metropolitan, to look at another person who interests me, which is Rembrandt, paintings of Rembrandt. And I was looking at a portrait of Rembrandt, thinking, how can I include this in a book on Springsteen? What is the connection between my interest in portraits and in Rembrandt and my interest in Springsteen? Or do they exist in completely parallel universes? So this is my take on how I could bring Rembrandt into a book on Springsteen. Rembrandt's self-portraits may seem the very antithesis of rock. On one hand, the portrait hangs mute through the centuries, silent, unaware, inanimate, even though to look into those barely glimmering eyes makes it hard to accept that this isn't Rembrandt looking at us. Rock, on the other hand, is ostensibly all present, all sound, and yet there's a link. Rembrandt's self-portraits are an uncompromising record of the toll of time. Witness a succession of such portraits, and with his merciless depiction of ripening features and the scars of experience, you see him age before your eyes. Springsteen's body of work, however different, is equally about the pain that living brings. His weary look on the cover of Magic speaks of the passing years. The artists look out at us and say, we're getting old. Witness the aging process. Witness our mortality, mirroring your own. It's also true that just as this portrait I'm viewing is not Rembrandt, so the voice and sound and songs that we hear on record are not Springsteen. Rembrandt made every brushstroke of the portrait, and Springsteen was involved in making the sounds on every song, but neither artist remains present in the artwork. It's not therefore all now, now, now in rock or in Rembrandt, but we're fascinated that the work came into being, that it records human activity, and that the moment of creation has vanished, while the result will remain part of a present beyond our own time. Art, when seen or heard or read, becomes the property of the recipient. So I realized from that that this was giving me ways into talking about Springsteen, ways that people hadn't talked about him before, and particularly the effect of the art on other people. And I then called chapter 1 Rock and Rembrandt. And in chapter 1, I explain what I mean by lonesomeness. Now, lonesomeness is a very American word. You can be lonely in Europe, but you can't really be lonesome. You have to go to the States to be lonesome. the US being the place where, as Gertrude Stein put it, there is more space where nobody is than where anybody is. And so I escaped there in youth. And I went to be lonesome on a greyhound, to be a stranger in a strange land, on the outside looking in. And I listened to Neil Young, who said, everybody knows this is nowhere. And I listened to Bob Seger and to Willie Nelson on the road again, and to Lynyrd Skynyrd and to various other bands. But one of those bands was a UK band, Supertramp. And this gave me, looking back on it, gave me more insight into how I could be approaching Springsteen. I'll just read you a paragraph or two about that, the insight that I had. Traveling once, it was the only piece of music that I had, and so I listened to it for about 4 days running, night and day. One addition to my collection, however, turned out to be anachronous. Boarding a maple leaf greyhound after a summer working in a Vancouver bookstore, I found a discarded cassette of Supertramp's Crime of the Century. It provided a soundtrack through Washington, Idaho, Montana, and all those states from the Northwest through to New Jersey to the Port Authority in New York in order for me to fly home. But no song intermingled more with my dreams than one called Rudy, on his train to nowhere, halfway down the line. Well, years later, I actually listened to that song more carefully and the lyrics, and I had a discovery. I discovered that I'd misheard the song. In the background, a station announcer lists place names, including Reading, Didcot, and Chippenham. The sounds are of London's Paddington Station. The track that Rudy is on is not some desolate railroad through prairies and badlands, as I'd imagined, but the Great Western Railway through my hometown in Wiltshire. Moreover, heading out of Chippenham, which is 3 miles that way, to Bath and Bristol, it crosses a bridge over the A4. If you ever take this ride, look through the window on your left, and you'll see a road named Rowden Hill. In a lay-by, 100 yards from the bridge, stands a memorial the size of a small amplifier. Inscribed in white around a depiction of a red Gretsch guitar is the statement, Eddie Cochran, cherished memories. This marks where a car wreck fatally injured the young writer and performer and author of, among other songs, Summertime Blues. And Cochran, aged 21, died in Bath the next day, Easter Sunday, 1960, less than a year before I was born. And I go past this this memorial most days when I'm in Wiltshire. Eddie Cochran, cherished memories. And what this made me realise was that my interest in music and art and everything was all about escape when I was young. It was always about going, it was somewhere else. The world of rock and roll, the unobtainable place of inexpressible happiness was somewhere else. And I realised from this that actually Rudy's train is crossing right over, like a crossroads, right next to Eddie Cochran's memorial. And that, in fact, although it's not entirely true that Chippenham, Wiltshire is the centre of rock and roll, it is true that the music that Springsteen makes as well, as a local author of his own place, is not about there, but also about here, about where we are from. And of course, one of his most famous songs is My Hometown. So my journey began with the idea of lonesomeness and solitude, but the other part of lonesomeness is companionship and connection that music and art creates for us and created for me as well. And Springsteen talks about this. He talks about this solitary, reflective process of writing, of producing art, of writing the lyrics and the music, versus the very physical experience of performance, both for the audience and the artist. Something, of course, that I was just listening to Niels Loughran a few minutes before starting, but that's something that they're terribly missing at the moment and that we're missing. We can't attend concerts. But there is still, in music and in art, there's always that moment of connection, that moment, as we have now, between the person creating or the person talking and the viewers or listeners. And this is why I wanted American Lonesome to be called, it's subtitled to be The Work of Bruce Springsteen, because in the end, art is about work, and work is about usefulness. And art, a book only exists, a song only exists when it is heard. Art is a form of action. And I wanted American Lonesome to be about that as well, so that maybe a 19, 20-year-old, who knows, might read the book and see how you can be galvanized by music, and perhaps music of a different kind for that person. So I then, in the next chapters, move into my American literature professorial mode, and I have 2 chapters on Springsteen as an American writer, comparing with American writers, classic solitudes and contemporary solitudes. In classic solitudes, I look at 19th century writers, Hawthorne, Melville, Thoreau, Whitman, Twain, and Emily Dickinson. In contemporary solitudes, I talk about Walker Percy, Richard Ford, Richard Wright, author of Native Son, and Joyce Carol Oates, a Catholic, blue-collar background, same thing, and also resident of New Jersey, and about Springsteen and American movies. And I may be the only person who thinks that Emily Dickinson and Bruce Springsteen inhabit the same artistic universe, but I'm going to try and convince you now that that's the case by just reading a page about a Springsteen song, My Father's House, and an Emily Dickinson poem, poem 609. Both of them are about trying to go back to a place where you once belonged. This is Emily Dickinson. Our years had been from home, begins Dickinson, and now before the door I dared not enter, lest a face I never saw before stare stolid into mine, and ask my business there. Envisaging a stranger answering the door, she replies that her business was a life I left. Was such remaining there? I leaned upon the oar I lingered with before, the second like an ocean rolled and broke against my ear. The speaker hesitates, reflecting on how time has passed. She's terrified of what she might find. She laughs a crumbling laugh that she could fear a door, fits her hand to the latch and runs away. In My Father's House, there's a similar troubling theme. Both poem and song are about a solitary being whose lonesomeness has as much to do with time as with space. Nebraska grew in particular out of Springsteen's memories of the timeless feel of his grandparents' house on Randolph Street. Given that several stories came directly out of his family experience, he often writes from a child's viewpoint in Nebraska. The quality of fearfulness suggests that Dickinson too is writing of a childhood memory. Both of them depict a common nightmare. Springsteen's speaker dreams that he or she is a child trying to get home through a forest before night. The wind rustles in the trees, ghostly voices rise from the fields, and finally the child breaks through the forest and reaches the house and the father. But then he wakes up and he gets in his car, the adult gets in his car, and he drives to the house. But when he knocks on the door, the occupant is a stranger behind a door chain. And her apologetic response is that no one by that name lives here anymore. To become an adult is to understand that if you do try to return home, which means to return to the past, you'll haunt a location that's no longer yours. Dickinson, the speaker, desists from turning the latch and daren't even knock. Springsteen finds the door opened by an unknown woman. We carry with us images of places from our past, and to go back is invariably to discover that the life and people we left have vanished. As the American author Thomas Wolfe said, you can't go home again. But what I try to do in books is go from the light to the dark, or the dark to the light, and so in the next chapter it's about the unutterably upbeat of Springsteen's work, performance. And this chapter is of time and the river. And I'll just read you the first paragraph of that to show you how I approach Springsteen in performance. Again, it begins in Chippenham, but it goes all over the place and all over America and the world, but it starts in Chippenham. It's a rainy December morning. I turn the ignition. The car thunders into life. Headlights blaze the driveway. I scroll the music. This is the first time I'll hear the Agora Ballroom Cleveland show of August 1978. I haven't looked at the set list. I want the surprise of a live show. August 78 was 9 months before I first flew to America and heard of Springsteen. Out of Chippenham, I drove down Rowden Hill. I drive down Rowden Hill on the A4 towards Cochrane's Memorial. Traffic lights, be ready for something spooky here. Traffic lights explode in droplets between the wipers. The rain on the glass roof echoes the downpour that battered the Capital Airways plane hurtling across the tarmac in June 79 for the first of my 5 flights to reach Stony Lake, Michigan. The extended entry to America is as vivid as this rainy December morning. The future ain't any damn thing, said the young Springsteen. Well, time and place, past and present, are about to coincide in it. And so the music comes on, or the announcer comes on. He says, this is being listened to all over the various radio stations in the Northwest. There are shouts and whistles and instruments tuning up, and then you hear Springsteen's voice saying, give me some lights, and then you hear a heavy drum beat and the strumming of E chords, and he begins to sing, though I'm only going to read it. I want to tell you, well, I'm going to raise a fuss, I'm going to raise a holler about a working all summer just trying to earn $1. Sometimes I'm thinking I got to get a date. No dice, son, intones Clemens, because you got to work late. Sometimes I wonder what I'm going to do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues. And I get it now, this shiver down my spine. That very moment that I was driving past Eddie Cochran's memorial, there was Springsteen opening this 1978 concert with Cochran's most famous song. I use that, the rest of the chapter, that launches me into a kind of reverie as I'm driving along and through the rain of thinking about concerts that I have seen or heard or attended through the 70s, 80s, 90s into the 21st century Springsteen concerts. And a discussion of Springsteen, and particularly Springsteen and the E Street Band live. From there, I have a chapter on romanticism, which is often seen as a pejorative word, as a negative word. But there are two kinds of romanticism. There's escapist romanticism, and there is pragmatic romanticism. And Springsteen, I talk about Springsteen's journey, which has also been my journey, from an escapist romanticism, which for him is Born to Run, encapsulates it, to a pragmatic romanticism, or a pragmatic idealism, where idealism can make a difference in a person's life. And he talks about this. He says the romantic that interests him is where you see the realities and you understand the realities, but you also see the possibilities. And so the chapter's about the practical consequences of belief, of faith. Have a little faith, there's magic in the night. Springsteen's music is full of this sense that belief in something, that faith in something actually has a practical effect on fact. It's quite an American perspective, not perhaps such a European perspective, this idea that idealism actually creates reality. And there's an argument between Bertrand Russell and William James about this, but William James, the American philosopher, he has an essay called Will to Believe, and Springsteen has a song Reason to Believe. And if you watch the Broadway, Springsteen on Broadway, you'll see that his Catholicism actually remains important to him, but faith can take many forms, and he certainly believes too that art changes lives. And I believe too that a single line can change a life. I then talk about Springsteen in chapter 6, Springsteen and fame, because he had to deal with 1984, born in the USA, suddenly mega fame. That's when so many people got to first listen to Springsteen, and he started playing in huge stadiums and wearing a bandana and all the rest of it. So I talk about what it must have been like to confront the fragility of identity, what it might have been like in the Born in the USA period, and about the idea of the reinvention of self and of the fluidity of identity in the self, and that's another very American theme. And then finally, I have a chapter called After Springsteen, which is about the legacy of Springsteen. And that means both the legacy of Springsteen after his own time and his own era, and after our era, and in the decades to come, But also, I think that the legacy in art begins as soon as a piece of art becomes public, because you immediately have the question of after art. What is the impact of that art beyond the person who created it? So I'm going to read from the last 2 paragraphs or so of the book, which brings everything back both to the past, to the beginning, and to the personal. The upshot of all this, of course, is that my personal sense of after Springsteen is that I wouldn't have had the particular career I had, for better or worse, had Dogie not introduced me to the music in the summer of 1980. Had that not been the summer I decided to become some kind of teacher, and had I not driven back and forth to night school to study and been up front at the June concert. After Springsteen is about the direction that lives can go in after being introduced to something that galvanizes them. Springsteen's music and performance were only factors among many others, but they were important. And when I think now of his music, I think not only of driving through the dark listening to Born to Run, but also of walking the rainy streets of my hometown listening to The River, age 19, and Darkness, of my first year at university trying to play chords from Nebraska, of taking off again for America to study in upstate New York, listening to Born in the USA, setting up home with my fiancée, listening to Tunnel of Love, becoming a parent to Human Touch and Lucky Town, traveling to California, listening to Tom Joad, visiting Ground Zero with The Rising, being in Texas when Devils and Dust came out, taking my family to a concert at the time of Magic, running through Trastevere over the Tiber to circuit the Colosseum listening to Wrecking Ball, completing the circle with the River Tour in Paris, and finally visiting Asbury Park. Oh, Bruce. In my demented memory, I'm back at Wembley Arena, age 20, with few prospects and nothing achieved. I'm in the 3rd row, and Springsteen, far younger than I am now, has halted the show. He calls back to a roadie who passes him a book. He saunters forward, guitar hanging behind, leans down and hands it to me. I take it and see the cover. It's not any book, but this book. Springsteen looks straight at me. He seems to want something. Would you sign it, please? Because he says please, I do, but he doesn't want it back. I told you, he says mysteriously, it's not about me. I'm a mere catalyst. It's your life. Make something of it. I nod and look around at the crowd I'm in and hand this book in turn to you. And so that's how I end the book, but it's not quite the end of the narrative or the story. One final thing. With one of my daughters, I attended Springsteen on Broadway, waited 4 hours with a copy of the autobiography of Born to Run, hoping he would turn up, thinking I'm too old to be doing things like this. He did turn up, and I had about 4 seconds, 4 decades after he had said to me, we'll get that one for you later, when I was 19. I had a few seconds to say something, and I said, I've written a book about you. In other words, we'll get that one for you later, 4 decades later. And this is the moment that he looked at me as I said this, and he said, that's so kind of you. But the nice thing, or the appropriate thing about this is that because he had his rock star shades on, I didn't look him in the eye. I looked at the shades and I saw my own reflection. And given the theme of the book, I think that seems all the more appropriate. So that's what I have to say, and that's my reading of the book. And I'm going to look now at the scroll down the side and see if anyone's asked any questions. Lots of people have said joined. I would guess the questions are going to come suddenly, but I can't see any yet. So I could ask myself a question. Well, I could point out a couple of things here. Well, someone will ask a question any moment, but I can point out a couple of things in this studio. So you've got the portrait of Springsteen here and of Clarence Clemens there, and of course you have a Fender Strata guitar here, which is completely ridiculous because I'm not very good at it. But I thought I'd better put that in just to make it look as if I was a musician. I'm not a musician at all. Do we have any questions? Am I looking in the right place? I hear something there. That may be a question. I know someone's asking a question, but I can't see anything here. I don't know why. Just bear with me. What if I type in any questions here? Will something come up? Perhaps someone can like my question, and then I'll know that someone is there. I know I can hear someone going ding ding. Okay, I've got a question here. I'm just looking on my phone, but I can see a question. So I don't know why it's not coming up on the on there, but there's certainly a question here. I've got one from Belinda Hoare. Questions from LSU near bottom. I don't see any questions, but I've got one from Kovac here. Question is, in writing, can you see it? Questions?
I can on my screen.
Technician, you can. Can you bring me the questions then? I don't see them here. My assistant is going to bring me some questions, but LB says, in writing a book that blends scholarship, the questions are coming up here, that blends scholarship and personal writing, how did you decide when to incorporate academic work and when to pull in more of your own voice? I suppose I've always thought that it was a little bit, when academics write, there is a tendency sometimes to pretend that you yourself don't exist, that it's somehow impersonal and objective, and I don't really accept that at all. So from my point of view, I try, as I'm just talking now, as me in my studio, so I try and do that with the book, and I try and keep it a very personal voice. I know that the readers are interested in Springsteen, not in me, but they might be interested in the effect of Springsteen on readers of which or listeners of which I'm one. So I just try to do it in a very natural way, and for me the process of a book is trial and error and just keep on doing it. I will write an awful lot more to start with, and I just cut it down until I just feel that everything appropriate that should be there is there. So I don't know if how much of an answer that is, but that's I play it by ear, I suppose. Belinda Cash has asked a question from New York, I believe, and yes, you have. And Belinda grew up with me many years ago. And thank you for listening in. What do you think of Bruce Springsteen's more recent work, published after your book was completed, like Western Stars? I went to see Western Stars. We've been living in Paris recently. I went to see it there. It was great to see an English language thing, but it was a tremendous thing to see on the screen. And I think that in a way, in answering LB Kovac's question, what Springsteen's very good at is combining the personal with the bigger picture, the things that matter more. And there, of course, in Western Stars, he's writing about aging, as he is in a song like The Wrestler. So I think it's tremendous stuff, and I think he's matured enormously. And I will tell you that Niels Lofgren, in a thing I was just watching, he says that they were going to go on tour next year with what he thinks is the best album Springsteen has ever created, but it hasn't come out yet. So he's one of those writers, I think, and one of those musicians who's got better and better, because he's brought maturity away from that escapism into his later work. And now Belinda says that that's somebody else's question. So whoever asked that question, thank you very much. I still don't have it on my screen here, but I'm looking for more questions on the Facebook page. maybe on that page here. Mike Corrigan, a question from Mike Corrigan. Andrew says, Andrew Sampson, Gavin, can you talk about your trip to America a bit more? Quick question first. Mike Corrigan says, did he sign your book? I didn't have it with me. I had a flyer, and Patty Scialfa signed the flyer and said, I look forward to reading your book. I have sent them the book. I haven't yet heard back, but I know it's on his reading pile. Andrew says, can you talk more about your trip to America a bit more? Well, it's all in the book, but I might need a slightly more specific question, except to say that I went to Asbury Park, I went to Colt's Neck and saw what I think was the ranch that he lives on, and I went out to where he was brought up. Most of the houses that he was brought up in, including the one which he writes Born to Run in, which he was renting, are something like 7.5. They all have half numbers, and I thought that was very interesting. It's as if he lived in the margins. The house that he was first brought up in was a half number, and it's very, it's very humble places these in Freehold, New Jersey, and I just wandered around and looked at. In fact, the second house he lived in is now a parking lot or a car park. Things move on. You can't go home again. But Springsteen himself did often drive back round to the places he grew up, and he went to see a psychiatrist who said, you're trying to resolve something that can never be resolved. So the autobiographical is clearly in there in those songs about dreaming of going back to places that he's from. Do I have more questions? You might have to put them on this messenger, since I don't have them on the screen here. Not sure why, since people have said they're there. And we have a question coming up here, I see. While it's coming up, I'll just say I'm just looking who's there, and delighted to see people from Canada, from Mexico, from Pakistan, from the garden just here, and from the States. And here we have a question from Adam Beaumont, who's 100 yards away. Did you attempt to reach out to Mr. S, I think that's Mr. Springsteen, as you were writing to get some input? In the books that I've written on Joyce, Carol Oates and William Stein, it was always very easy to get in touch with the author and to interview them. In fact, I didn't get a contract for the Springsteen book for a year because I had to work out how I'd do the permissions, and I talked to his lawyers a lot, but never to him. The only things I've ever said to Springsteen are, well, he said to me, we'll get that one for you later. I said, I've written a book about you, and he said, that's so kind of you. That's the only interaction that I've had with him, talking to Patty Scialfa outside the Springsteen on Broadway. So no, but he's written a lot in his various interviews. He's a very intelligent, very well-read individual, so I was able to get all that I needed really from looking at what the conversations that other people had with him. I'm still kind of waiting for that 3-line letter saying, oh, gee, thanks for writing the book and giving me a copy. But here's Carla Neblett, soon to be the author of King of Rabbits, I see. And she's just written a question here. Brilliant book, Carla Neblett. Gavin, I'm pretty sure you said a book only exists when it's read. How is this justified? It's like saying, this is a rant, I think, it's like saying a writer isn't a writer unless they're published, which I'm pretty sure you convinced me wasn't the case when you were supervising me. In fact, you once said, the book already exists, you just need to find it. And that points, my book was just a few chapters. I think what I mean, Carla, is that, of course, the first reader of a book is the person writing it. So it always exists for that person. But although that can be satisfying in itself, and a musician can create their work, in the end, however personal and solitary an experience it was, and however much you get from doing it for yourself, what most people want is some sort of readership. Now that readership may be one person, but the fact is that if a book is closed, then it doesn't have meaning for anyone who hasn't read it. It has meaning for the person who wrote it, but meaning is created between the reader and the words on the page. And the same with, I think, with music. Somebody needs to hear it. It's like that old thing about the tree in the forest. Does it make a sound if there's nobody there to hear it fall? So I think that it's fair to say that meaning exists once somebody experiences the art and they make something of that themselves. That's what I mean. But no doubt you'll have more to say to me about that. Nicole Jacqueline Bionnet from Canada. I appreciate how you said that art and music serves as an escape. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Could you elaborate a bit more about why My Hometown is your favourite song? I assume that for you today it may serve as an escape back to your past. Has it always been your favourite song? Now, my sister's listening to this and she may have asked a question. She will probably say, well, Chippenham isn't your hometown. It is now, but it isn't where I grew up. And I didn't grow up in a hometown. I grew up in the countryside. And I probably wouldn't say my hometown was, I don't have a favourite. There's so many great songs of Springsteen's. One that it might be my favourite is one most people have never listened to, which is called County Fair. Fantastic song. And another one, The Time That Never Was. But I think it's a very important song, My Hometown, because it is about this question of identity. Now, Springsteen, he talks about watching the Last Picture Show, and he says that at the end of that, the boy in the Last Picture Show drives out. He wants to get away from the Texan town that he comes from, this kind of semi-ghost town. And then he gets all the way out and he stops the car and he turns around and he goes back, because he realizes, as Springsteen realized, it's all very well to be born to run, to go off, but then what happens if you go out and there's nobody else there? And where is yourself? Where is your identity? And really our identity is, in so many ways, is where we come from, and the family that we grow up in, and the environment of our childhood, and so on. So that's why I think it's not my favorite song. It's certainly a very important and profound song for people in terms of their identity. I believe here that I have a question, which might be from Amelia. Well, I think my sister, who says, or I think she says she liked it, something like that. So, thank you. Good. Let me see if there are any other questions here. I don't have any more questions here, so I will give it another couple of minutes. I'm very happy to answer any more questions if there are any. I hope that you have been enjoying the reading, and I've certainly enjoyed doing it. And we have another question from Andrew Sampson. I've got the impression of you over the short time we've known each other that you're quite an obsessive artist. By that I mean painting is something you could never do without. Do you think of Bruce as an obsessive musician in that he just had to sing and make music, and is that why he fascinates you? I do think obsession is really interesting, and I think that William Siren, my first subject, was clearly, his mother died of cancer when he was 13, 14, and often something happens to someone at a young age that makes them slightly doubt that everything is quite as it should be or as it looks. And so that often leads people to have to explore things. And Joyce Carol Oates, well, the most prolific living American author, and she has said that we pursue our hauntedness. The things that haunt us are what we have to write about. And she definitely couldn't not write. Springsteen himself has said, it wasn't a question of Would I give up? No one was going to stop me. I was going to do this, whether anyone ever recorded anything, anyone ever came to hear anything. I was going to be doing it. And of course, he's produced far more songs than have ever actually been in the public eye. So yes, he is an obsessive artist. I think that I've gone a long time without painting, but yes, I probably have that obsessive streak in me. And Springsteen himself, very interesting to know, his autobiography, he had a very difficult relationship with his father, who was an alcoholic and was not someone who was really felt he'd had a satisfied life, and was very, very tough on Springsteen. So much so that Springsteen developed a stutter, and even his knuckles went black from chewing them, from nerves that he had. And so he had a very supportive mother who bought him his first guitar. And I think that it was about him somehow trying to find his identity, or assert his identity, make his mark in the world. His children apparently called him a attention prostitute. He obviously needs that sort of sense of the audience and so on, that on some level validate him. But I'm sure he's come through all that now. But yes, he's an obsessive artist, and I'm certainly interested in the obsessive. I'm not sure how you can be an artist without having a degree of obsessiveness, really. But as long as you can sort of step back from it as well, and enjoy life too, that's fine, I think. Let me have a look to see if there are any further questions. Mike Corrigan, do you have plans for the next book? Oh, Mike. Well, I never talk about my next book, but I will do for 2 minutes. I don't have a publishing contract or anything for this, but I recently stopped my work, and we've been, as I was saying, living in Paris, and I've been gathering materials for a painting exhibition, so I've been painting much more than before. But I happen to have written a 185,000 word manuscript just because I did, and I'm now, which is unreadable, and now so it has no meaning, Carla, yet. But I'm cutting it down and cutting it down and cutting. That's my way of working until maybe I'll have something. It's a bit like Michelangelo. I'm not like Michelangelo, but Michelangelo starts with a big block. And if you go and see the statue of David in Florence, and as you go up to it, or you can see some in the Louvre as well, the most interesting things are often the ones that are not finished, the ones he abandoned, and he finds the figure in the rock. That's what he's doing. He's working with the rock to find the figure, and life is like that, and we try and find some shape through what we're doing. So I'm whittling it down, I'm chiseling away, in the hope that maybe there will be a book of 100,000 words there that somebody might read and give meaning to. It involves painting. I've written about literature, music, and another great love I have is painting. So it does involve the subject of oil painting, which is nice because I have a card to go to the Louvre as often as I want, which is much of the time when we're there. Any further questions? I don't see any further questions. So I am going to, it is 20:53 or 2:53. I will give it 1 more minute to see if anyone, you can say goodbye or something on it, I suppose. Maybe it's frozen, I don't know. But I will assume there are no more questions unless I hear one in the next minute or two. But I hope that you have enjoyed. That's all the questions that have been posted, says LB Kovac. And so I think it's probably time to wrap this up. But thank you very much for coming to my studio and joining me here from Canada and Mexico and United States and other parts of Europe and so on. I hope that it's given you some insight into both the writing of a book and this book in particular, and the music and the work of Bruce Springsteen. There we go. It's very satisfying. I like writing books, and I hope another one, Mike, will be on its way at some point. So thank you very much.